I'm Jason Holmes, and you're not. I'm a forester with Bayfield County, just here, and I want to talk about a little project that we did kind of in conjunction with land records and help from friends to try to assess jack pine regeneration. A little bit about the county forest and me. So I'm the inventory and analysis forester there. Well, that doesn't. There. Okay, so I'm the inventory and analysis forester at Bayfield County. The county forest is its own set of land. It's 176,000 acres. It's the yellow on that map. I did not feed that into Map Doctor, but believe me, I will. So the focus of the county forest is the main focus of the county forests in Wisconsin are timber production, but it's a multiple use kind of thing where we're thinking about recreation, we're thinking about wildlife, we're thinking about just forest ecology. I put a picture of our yurts on there. We have yurts that can be rented on Airbnb and campgrounds scattered throughout the county. There's a lot going on with the county forest. The Berkey Trail, a lot of mountain bike trails. There's always seems like some interesting research project going on through a university or maybe a federal program. So a lot of neat things. It's a diverse place to work in terms of its forest types and just the things that are happening. I'd also like to just say, please interrupt with a question or a clarification or a witty quip if you have one as I move along. And I'll do that. What do you think of, and I'd like a little interaction from the room, what do you think of when I say jack pine? What's the first thing that pops to your mind? Any brave souls? Deer browse, that's the forester talking.
Sandy soils.
Sandy soils, yes. Norwegian? Okay.
Pulpwood. Pulpwood.
Pulpwood, yeah. Serotinous cones. We're getting good answers. Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the humble jack pine and just kind of give you some background on why jack pine matters and maybe make the case for that. A funny aside, I had a friend of a friend who they had a baby and didn't tell anyone the name, as you sometimes don't. The baby's born, and then we're gonna present this child to the world. They said, "Oh, we named him Jack Pine." And my friend was a forester, and he was kind of did this, and they were like, "That's cool, right? Like that's a good tree." And he kind of was like, "Oh, it's awesome." The Jack Pine is sort of scraggly and scruffy and this humble pine, you might say. It's not the thing that we picture as this beautiful straight lodgepole, which incidentally, I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail, but yeah, the humble jack pine. It's a great tree. It's super important for wildlife, and it also, as Al had said, it is important economically for pulp. There are mills that are using jack pine to create dimensional lumber. Jack pine sometimes are smaller, and these mills optically analyze a stick of jack pine, and if they can cut a 2x4 out of it, it'll go through the optical sensor and out comes a 2x4. It's a great wood. Jack pine has decreased across the state of Wisconsin, and that's problematic. There's climate change pressure that's predicted to be on jack pine. It is in the southern extent its range. It's almost kind of a boreal-ish species, so we expect in the future its range to move northward. Meanwhile, here's this these sites that have been traditionally occupied by all kinds of different wildlife. So we're especially interested in Connecticut warbler, just kind of laying the ecological case for jack pine. Connecticut warbler, golden-winged warbler, least flycatcher, Kirtland's warbler, Vesper sparrow. Some of these are species of special concern, and they're on the brink, especially the Connecticut warbler. In the last couple of years, its population has dropped precipitously. So we think a lot about the future of our forest and jack pine's presence on it. So this is a stand of jack pine in the town of Hughes, south of Iron River. About 10, 12 years ago, the county forest department started making a shift from seedlings, individual trees like you're seeing over on the left image, where we plant a baby tree, to seed. And we're doing reforestation work on 400 to 500 acres a year. That's kind of a sort of a average that bobs up and down. When I say reforestation, just to be clear, when we harvest trees, most of the regeneration, the new forest that we get, just come because there's seed existing and the forest perpetuates itself and things work out. We'll apply different techniques, but reforestation or artificial regeneration is something we do on a really small subset of the 4,500 to 5,000 acres that we do some kind of a harvest on each year. Only, again, 400 to 500 acres, so just, you know, a small percentage are artificially regenerated. And then of that, just a fraction of it is jack pine. So we started looking at some different ways to regenerate jack pine instead of putting seeds in the ground. This is cost prohibitive. Sarah from Douglas County knows full well that deer love to browse jack pine, especially the nitrogen-rich baby jack pine that come out of a nursery. They're especially delicious to our ungulate friends. So we started trying to experiment with moving from planting to seeding. And some of the reasons were hoping to get higher density of jack pine. So instead of planting, you know, 1,000 stems, 1,000 seedlings per acre, we could just simply scatter more seed across the site. And for Kirtland warbler habitat, especially, we could achieve some of those habitat goals we wanted. So for Kirtland's warbler, it was also more cost efficient to scatter seed. Creates more of a natural aesthetic rather than rows of things that seem artificial and people generally kind of don't like the look. And also for the deer browse element, we felt like we were seeing the less nitrogen rich, just the natural regeneration of jack pine was sometimes less browsed or less preferentially browsed by deer. So we said, hey, let's start with seeding. So the process, just to move through this quickly, the process was, I'll say the word, a clear cut, basically remove all the trees because jack pine are shade intolerant. They need 100%, they need a lot of sunlight. They're not going to grow in a partial canopy. These are fire adapted species. They're used to a fire ripping through. Sarah mentioned the cones being serotinous. You can see it's kind of glued together looking. And when you have a temperature of 120, 140 degrees because a fire runs through, or sometimes on a really hot day, they'll open up, they'll come unglued, unstickied, and the seeds will drop out. And that's a whole different talk, but we will clear cut, we will site prep, and I'll show you a picture of the site preparation work. This is a disc trencher, a power trencher, creating furrows, basically places where there is not grass competition, where there's good soil, mineral soil or sand that the seed can fall onto. We'll do that. There's a team of seed collectors throughout the state that will pick, and you can do this too if you're really interested in it. You can, I think it's $50 a bushel or something like that, $45 per bushel for jack pine cone at your local DNR ranger station. And there's people who do this. My kids have done this. I wasn't breaking any laws. They did it willingly, I promise. So we'll clear cut, we will take seed that's collected, and then through a DNR airplane, we'll scatter, just like you go and scatter grass seed on your lawn with one of those little whirly-copter things, whatever those are called, a seed spreader. Basically, an airplane is just a big glorified seed spreader that trickles jack pine seed out the tail of the plane. It's 4 ounces of jack pine seed per acre. That's approximately 32,750 seeds per acre. This room if we were to seed this room, would be, you know, somewhere in the ballpark of 1,108, just roughly, seeds in this room. So it's a pretty heavy application, knowing that a lot of those seeds are not going to make it, but some of them will, and that's great. We broadcast them and put them on the snow. They germinate well in the spring, so you'll see the plane flying over snow. That snow melts, the ground is nice and damp and saturated and has moisture available to help in germination of those seeds. Anyway, it's a great thing. You have to wait 3 to 4 growing seasons. You can't just go out and expect it to be there like the carrots in your garden. This is a long, slow process. Germination isn't instantaneous. It's more of a process than it is an event. So what do? We monitor. And that's actually not the plot size that we would use, but it's a picture of real foresters in the woods. And that's just a rare thing to see. Those two are very handsome. We will walk a stand for monitoring and get a sample of the site just by taking a stick that's about 6.8 feet in radius and swinging a circle. It's 1/300th of an acre, which is roughly the size that a tree will occupy when it's a teenager, you could call it, a pole size. So we'll take and kind of sample throughout the site and say, well, this is a tree size space. Is there a tree here? We could give it a thumbs up or give it a thumbs down. There's different ways of doing this, but this is the way that I'm going to kind of focus on. So we'll monitor and say, are there trees growing? Are they not? And away we go. And that's all really great. And it seems really simple in practice, but it's so much more efficient when you have seedlings instead of seeds. So here's the conundrum, and this is why we start thinking about using UAVs and technology. These are large sites, hundreds of acres sometimes, and there's those trenches, those furrows, and you can just imagine a poor sap like myself walking around up and down furrows, and is there a tree here? Is there a tree there? And because we have not planted them on a 7-foot by 9-foot spacing, it's just really patchy and irregular. And the more heterogeneous your stand is, the more plots that you have to put in to kind of calculate a good solid statistical average. So the more time, you can just feel the frustration. So I started asking if there was a better way, and the words of a song that's been near and dear to my heart from R. Kelly came to mind. See, I was on the verge of breaking down. Sometimes silence can seem so loud. There are miracles in life I must achieve, but first I know it starts inside of me as I'm walking. If I can see it, then I can be it. If I can just believe it, there's nothing to it. I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky. I think about it every night and day, spread my wings and fly away. And that is exactly what we did. That's the corniest thing I've ever tried to pull off. You're welcome. Yeah, so it was something like that. It was something like R. Kelly. Believe me, R. Kelly was not in my mind, but I just thought that'd be funny to share. So with Scott's help and with a beautiful DJI Imagery drone, we flew a site and captured some imagery. This is the red dot, not super specific, but kind of town of Bayview, northwest of Washburn, is where the site happened. We worked with Scott. We chose a site that was 5 years old. It had been seeded in 2016, so this was in the height of the pandemic. Scott and I stood several hundred yards apart of each other and yelled, and it was very great. It was a 64-acre site. This is a picture of the site and kind of the color infrared imagery that was produced from it. We did it just after, you'd see white in it. Those are little pockets where there's still some snow. This was April 2021. And Scott flew at 400 feet above ground level, which was the max. I was interested in trying to create a process and a workflow that was fast and efficient and not zillions of pictures and terabytes of data. I wanted to go as high as we could, acquire the imagery in the least amount of time, because I was trying to beat the forester. I wanted to fly instead of to walk. So Scott did that. It was great. It was just before green up, where we would see the maximum contrast between green foliage on the jack pine and before the grasses or the forbs or whatever else would turn green, and then just introduce more I don't know what noise, just more green into the image. Scott flew it with his sensor, and I can't remember what it was, Altum, something like that. There was multispectral, lots of spectrals, the best spectrals. The bands that seemed to be the most beneficial were just the color infrared, regular color infrared image, RGB, or sorry, I don't remember what they are because my brain's cluttered. Red, green, and near infrared. That's what we used. Stitched and orthorectified in Pix4D. Resolution was just under 2 inches per pixel, so this is a pretty darn detailed image as it comes out. I edited my stand shape, the area, because it wasn't exactly perfect. So just my workflow was make sure I'm only going to be doing analysis on, what is the plantation. So that had to get manually digitized, which is frustrating. Like, oh, I didn't see this coming. And then clipped raster to the final polygon shape that I knew was actually where we planted. Some of the larger sites had to be done in multiple flights just because they were big. And so that was kind of another, a little bit of a curveball where I just decided to split the overlapping areas of the rasters along a single line, and then just merge them or mosaic them into one single new raster. So the idea was to generate an orthophoto and then use ArcGIS Pro to classify the imagery and tell us which pixels were basically tree pixels, and then use that classification to determine how full or how empty the stand was of jack pine. And then really to make the management level decision, do we need more trees or are there plenty here? Will there be holes in this? Is this Swiss cheese? And sometimes that's desirable and just fine. We don't need like 100% tree cover, but in some of these for Kirtland's warbler and other reasons, we were looking for a higher level of stocking. So that's the site. I knew that we would need to ground truth this because we're talking about fairly small trees, in fact, really small trees. So we took a Trimble R8 sub-centimeter survey grade GPS, went out to the site and kind of squared off a 50-foot by 50-foot test area and marked it with bucket lids so we could see them clearly in the imagery. And then I just went around with the survey grade GPS and a staff and took a coordinate at every single jack pine that I could find in that 50 by 50 foot area. Why 50 by 50? Because that's the first number I thought of. I was making this up. And for each tree at each point, I just recorded its average radius in tenths of feet, because that's what I thought to do. Here are some of the trees. You can see in this image, my 50 by 50 foot area. You can see in the center, I just called out tree number 1, and the right side of the slide, that is tree number 1. That's a 2.0 foot radius jack pine tree. So you're like, oh, that should be easy to classify with 2-inch resolution. And it was. This is tree number 2, 0.8 feet in radius average. So a smaller one. This one isn't on the map because I took smaller trees throughout the site. I captured 34, I think, individual trees just kind of out and about. There's this guy, and that's small. That's 0.2 feet radius, which is a garbage number, but it's really small. So we ground truth them. You can see on this map, maybe kind of a small white bluish dots. There's a shift in the photo, and I just left it and went with it. There was a little bit of an offset from the point that I collected. So if you look southeast or down into the right of each of these dots, you'll see the tree that corresponds with it. Maybe that's helpful. We use that to do some testing and verification later on. So the seedlings were ground truthed. I took a class online from the Forest Service. They have this GTAC, Geospatial Training, Other Words Center acronym, like the Forest Service likes to do. And it was really great. It was on imagery classification and segmentation. And I kind of followed some of their steps. This is one of their slides where they basically contrasted a pixel-based approach where you just assign classes based on the values of pixels, or their spectral characteristics. It just looks at the the distribution of pixel values across your image and says, how many classes do you want to break it up into? So that's one approach, the pixel-based approach. There's also the object-based approach, where the image is segmented automatically in our Pro. There's actually two ways to do this, but the image is segmented into sets of pixels that have similar internal composition of pixel characteristics. So they're clumping them together by size. There are things that are this big by shape, by color, texture, pattern, shadow, and dissimilar neighbors. So this seemed like a pretty promising approach. And this is what I started with. I tried it unsupervised and said, okay, ArcPro, you figure out what's out there. And you can set these levels of spectral detail. You can let it do it unsupervised and figure it out on its own, or you can feed it tree training samples and say, ArcPro, these are the things I want you to really focus on. This, and digitize around it as a tree. This is a stick. This is bare brown. This is dead foliage, etc. You can fiddle with these fairly nebulous values in the object-based wizard that ArcPro gives you. And you can see from left to right here, the spectral detail is being cranked up from 15 to 20. You can see that the detail, I don't know if you can see that well, but it just gets a lot grainier, a lot more, it gets more picky in how small it's really not small, but it's the spectral detail, how finely it slices those up. So how did it do? This is the actual site. So this is with spectral detail of 6, because I thought we might as well try it low. This is spectral detail, I believe, of 18. You can see just a radically different product between those two. So what did we get? Object-based, either underclassified or overclassified. I was missing trees or grabbing onto trees that were not trees. You can see in this image, I kind of put in the circle, the purple circles there, places where there was a tree. I knew there was one there because of that GPS point, but it just failed to classify it. I fought with this a lot and I couldn't crack the nut, so to speak. So we tried the other approach, which was pixel-based classification or segmentation and then classification. So I let it run unsupervised and said, here you go, ArcPro, here's an image, give me a max of 40 classes, because that seemed like a good number. And then I went through and created my own schema. Instead of the traditional NLCD land classes, I just said, I have jack pine and other, and went through all these different classes and said, this is what it boils down to. The green is jack pine, the gray is other. And it did better than the object-based approach. So that was that. Moving forward in the process, I knew I was grabbing little isolated. I wanted to be conservative with this. I wanted this to underestimate the presence of jack pine instead of overestimate it. So I ran a majority filter where basically cells are replaced if the majority value in the contiguous neighborhoods are other. So if I have one Lone Ranger jack pine pixel that's 2 inches by 2 inches, that's going to get pitched. But there are 2 of them nested together. I think that if I remember the math right and the type that I use, I think it was a neighbor of 8. I don't recall. Sorry, a little fuzzy on that, but it would keep it. So I'm looking for. I'm wiping out some of the Lone Rangers in Forestry talk. That's how we call that. How did it do? It did better. The red circles are the single lone pixels that were dropped, and the purple are, for whatever reason, the ones that I kept. So you can see majority filters cleaning it up a little bit. Is that different than the object-based approach? Yeah, I know, but this was just faster and seeing the way that I wanted to go. So great, I have an idea now of where my trees are, a more conservative idea of where the trees are, or where there is foliage, I should say. Clarification here, we're not finding the center of a tree. These are clustered sometimes. There are 8 jack pine seeds that all germinated within 2 feet of each other. How many trees are there? Well, I guess there's 8. But do I need it to tell me that? I don't really care, because in a 2-foot area, friends, there will only be one tree. Trees are ruthless and mean, and they fight each other. And you don't think so. You all love them and pet them and breathe their air, but they're mean. They're mean. They fight each other. So think differently about them as you go forward. Anyway, so I didn't care about individual tree locations. I just cared about tree foliage presence and kind of had that be my surrogate for an actual tree. Next, how do we quantify this? I ran a tessellation process. It generated a tessellation. I created tree-sized cells where each cell or each hexagon is 145-ish square feet, or 1/300th of an acre, the size of a tree's canopy at whole timber stage. And then I just classified my raster, this one, and I said, if you are purple, or if you are a tree, if you are a jack pine, you get a value of 1. Everything else gets a value of 0. And then I simply ran zonal statistics to calculate how many 1s do I have. And obviously wouldn't count the 0. It was just easy math. How many 1s or jack pine classified pixels do I have in each of my hexagons? That's really difficult to say. That's all those words together. So zonal statistics to table, I just threw a couple of values in just to kind of show you what it was, how those numbers worked out. And there was a large drum roll sound that Esri has created, and it was really nice, and a cymbal splash sound at the end of that. And I created the stand level summary that said this stand is 84% stocked. What you're seeing here, the red hexagons, are places where there was a 0, where there was less than 1, which is a 0 value in that cell. You can see there's some spatial characteristic to it. Well, it looks over on the right, on the east, northeast. There might be some holes there. Maybe that deserves some further inspection in the field. Or maybe we say, hey, 84% is a great number. As an aside, the kind of the go with it number that the Wisconsin DNR gives us is 70% stocked. It's really fluid, and it's sort of what are you looking for and what can you deal with. Again, that doesn't mean that there actually is a tree inside of each hexagon. It just means that there's green foliage that might be reaching into that hexagon from the neighboring hexagon. But we just said we're going to kind of use this as a stand-in. The ground sampling that I did in this stand came up with a number that was really close to, and I couldn't find it. It was like 70. It was 70 something. So we were like 8% away from the average that I calculated with the drone, using the stick and the go trip around the site method. So it seemed like it was a pretty good number that was jiving with what we were seeing in the ground. Beginning to land the plane, I wanted to know, in addition to just, does it make sense with my ground sampling of actual trees in my plots? How does it work in the imagery? Let's try to do some visual inspection or error checking. And this is a fascinating table. Another drum roll, Esri, thank you very much. I simply chose 1% of my hexagons, so 178 of them, and zoomed to each. I just randomly chose them and then zoomed in Arc Pro to each one of them, and then did my best with the imagery to determine if there was a tree or foliage present or not. And this is what I came up with, where 80, it's kind of the same number, that's sort of funny. About 85% passed, where it said, yes, there's a tree here. And I said, well, yes, there is, or no, there is no tree. And I can say with a high level of certainty, no, there isn't a tree. So it got it right. 3% failure rate, and 12% just, I don't know if that's a tree or not. Even with high res UAV imagery, I would zoom into it and go, I don't know what that is. And I'll talk about that more in just a second. It's been a second. There was a source of confusion or ambiguity and bad classification was from some native forbs, bearberry and club moss. So you can see in the blue circle there, that's the bearberry, and just to the naked eye, it looks a lot like the jack pine trees that are slightly brighter pink that are surrounding it. The shovel there, right in front of the shovel, is bearberry. And it was really, really tough to tell those two apart. The classification did not do a great job with it, and it was tough for me to tell with my naked eye which was which. What do we do with that? I wanted to check also just for sensitivity, because I'm a sensitive guy. And I thought, let's run those numbers. I have these diameters. It was so funny. It's the funniest thing I've said. I ran the numbers of the tree radius, the tree crown radiuses, radii, and these are kind of crappy numbers because the number that I sampled was fairly low. So is this statistically sound? No, it's not, but it gives you an idea. So let's start at the top. A 0.2 foot radius tree, which is very small, like the smallest out there, more or less. I only actually sampled one of those in my 50 by 50 foot area, and it failed 100% of the time. It couldn't find those. So you know where you're at. Jumping to the 0.3, to the 0.4. Okay, 0.4, it's failing 43% of the time. It's getting better, but you probably don't want to, hang your hat on that. By the time we get to a 1 foot diameter, half-foot radius tree, we're only failing 20% of the time, which is pretty good in my opinion. It's not good enough in my opinion. I drive a hard bargain, but I wanted to know. So from there on, like it was getting them every single time with those larger trees. So I think that that's useful information, but it couldn't get the small ones. I said I wasn't happy with it, and I'm not exactly happy with it. And it's not just because, I might be type A and I want the moon and give me everything and a pony on top. But I wanted to know because for management reasons, the site was 5 years old. Sod, grasses were already starting to encroach in the areas where we had trenched and peeled back the sod competition and had bare mineral soil. So the window to be able to plant something in this site or to seed again is closing 5 years later. What are you going to do then? And for us as foresters, it's important that we keep forests as forests and not just, well, we deforested this and turned it into kind of a savanna thing. Is that evil? No, it's not, but that's not the goal. We want to have trees where we used to have trees. And I need to know at an earlier point in time, or I want to know at an earlier point in time, whether we've been successful or whether we haven't. So the next steps, what I'd like to do, and Scott loves me for this, and Heather as well, I'm envisioning, or I'm stealing an idea from some researchers at University of Calgary, where instead of capturing UAV imagery across the entire site or creating a single orthophoto, what I'd like to try to do is to be able to get lower with the UAV to control the height above the ground. And so that would mean following the contour of the site, keep the drone at, let's just throw out 50 feet above ground. This is the Calgary method. And you would take individual frames and have one picture out of the UAV. It wouldn't be stitched together with others, but it would stand alone as its own sample area. You would trim that image to remove, I think it's parallax or the distortion that you get from a photo as you progress toward the edges. So you would know your ground sampling distance is exactly because you're controlling the height of the drone above the ground. You're taking a picture that's very high resolution. The researchers at Calgary were, I don't have that, but they were grabbing trees. They were able to classify trees in individual frames that were like a couple of centimeters tall. They were getting really small ones using an object-based approach. So I would like to do that and have a drone take a picture every 100 by 100 feet or something like that, and just sample the site instead. I think that would keep the problem or in the time of having to merge several rasters into one and then run the classification and go through 30 some odd classes of pixels and manually reclassify them into jack pine, into not jack pine. There was some time investment into that. The UAV time was a significant investment as well. And I'm trying to beat the boots, as you say, trying to be faster than the ground sampling work. So maybe this will work out, maybe it won't, but that's kind of my next steps thought and what I'm thinking about. So big thanks to Scott, and I worked a lot with Sophia Kazidis, who had worked in Scott's department on some of the classification work. I ran a lot of this, a painful amount of this, by the man in the green shirt, Al Kirschbaum, who's just a friend of mine and who's been so helpful with being able to just bounce ideas off of. Al has heard more of my stray, crazy ideas than anyone should ever have to deal with, and he's gracious about it and sometimes encouraging and sometimes a healthy dose of reality. So I'm going to call that the end of my presentation and see if you have any questions.